Hello, Tim Wilmot here, and welcome to my watercolor demo, this time a rainy scene. Now, the reference photo I have here for this video was kindly sent in by a subscriber, Pyara Singh, so thank you very much for that. And I do welcome submissions from people out there, from subscribers, for future subjects, future watercolor demonstrations. More on that towards the end of the video. But so this video is on a rainy scene, and I think this does allow us to use a lot of different watercolor techniques, a wash, of course, wet in wet, lifting out colors as well, lifting out color from the paper, with some of the lines that we've got going across the road there. And from a composition point of view, it's got some nice elements to it. So we've got trees, being a rainy day, we've got some background trees, so we'll probably introduce a faded edge to those background trees. We've got some strong verticals with these utility poles here, and some nice horizontals with the telephone or electricity cables. As regards these cars and these little rickshaws here, I'm going to change those around. More on that in a minute as regards my overall plan with this. But I'll certainly keep in this left-hand car here. It's a nice, what I think about with watercolors, where's the light, where's the dark, and trying to have them up against each other so there's a nice contrast between the light and the dark. So we've got whatever light there is here hitting the back windscreen, up against the darker background, and there's another little rickshaw in there as well. Over on the left hand side there's something going on there, but being over on the left hand side and sort of in the background, we'll simplify that. Over on the right hand side here, not very interesting, so we'll probably just concentrate really on this middle area. Of course, being a rainy day, we've got to think about the effects we want for giving the appearance of the wet surface of the road. So we've got some long, do you see here, some long reflections from the cars, and then also from those utility poles as well. So we'll have to think about introducing that into the painting. And then over on the left hand side here, we've got an interesting pattern with these actual little bits of block paving here on the pavement, and introducing lines, which these lines are really helping with the composition because they're sort of leading us into the picture. Bit of perspective going on there as well, as is some of these lines across the road here, these diagonal lines. So they're also helping us with perspective and leading us into the picture. So what I sometimes do before doing a painting is think in my mind what are going to be the steps or stages, and I might do a little sketch on some scrap paper and put down some numbers as regards the sequence. So here we can see the main elements of the picture with, I'm going to have 3 cars on the road there. So we start off with number 1, the sky, do the sky first, then number 2 will be fairly quickly after that, the background trees, and we'll let that bleed into the sky so we get that soft appearance, that effect of a rainy day, a gloomy day in the background. Then we will paint in the cars, 3 cars with a slight wash, leave out the windscreens, then the road surface around the cars, then drop in some dark shadows of the cars, the trees, the utility poles there as well. And then while that's still damp, number 6 is we will lift out some lines to give the effect of some lines where the tires, where the cars have gone through. So that's the overall plan. So starting with the initial drawing then, with a 3B pencil, just roughly drawing in there from the left hand side that main tree, and then the background, just the actual line of the trees. There's a sort of medium-sized tree over on the right hand side. Get in these poles. Then the base of the tree over to the left hand side, the tree trunk. Now get in the sidewalk lines, that pavement, that main side, the right hand side of the pavement, and now this car on the left hand side, windscreen, so quite a simple shape really, and then a second car coming towards us, slightly connected to that first car. And a third car over on the right hand side, again coming towards us at a slightly different angle so we can see more of the side of the car. Get the windscreen right, rear wheel, front wheel and the front of the car. And headlights. Now I've marked out the headlights because I'm going to have a little bit of reflection down onto the road surface from those headlights. So I want to paint around those. So that's why I've drawn them out, and let's put in some headlights on that middle car as well. I'm going to paint around those as carefully as I can, and then we can introduce some reflections down into the wet road. I'm going to have a figure or two on the right hand side. I know there wasn't one there on the photograph, but I think it needs something on the right hand side just to add a bit of balance and a bit more interest to the composition. Try and have their legs not going in the same, not looking too identical, not synchronized. And then that right hand pavement, now just here I'm making some faint lines just to help me when I put in the lines across the road. where I'm going to lift off some of the paint just to assist me there, just so I can see what I'm doing. So I think that's nearly done with the initial drawing. So now for the first wash, and I'm using a Raphael brush here, size 6 I think it is. It's a synthetic mop brush. So starting with the sky, and I'm making a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber. So my palette from the top, that dark colour is neutral tint, then we've got burnt umber, burnt sienna, a yellow ochre, viridian green, which I'll be using I think for the trees, cobalt green coming towards the middle. That middle blue is cerulean blue, then cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, or I think it might be a Windsor red now, alizarin crimson, light red, then cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. So this sky is a murky mix of this ultramarine blue and burnt umber, and we come down to the horizon over that tree line. Now paint carefully around the tops of the cars. So we're still on stage 1 here on my little plan. Now for the background trees, I'm using an old mop brush that's seen better days, and I've chopped off the end of it to give a very ragged edge. And so the background wash is still moist or damp, the sky wash is still moist or damp. So I'm mixing in a thicker mix now of viridian green and a little bit of burnt umber there, ultramarine blue. So it's going to be a thicker mix. And then we'll just drop that in, and you can see it's blending quite well with that sky. We're going to be a little bit darker towards the base. And using this ragged brush here, it does give quite nice foliage effects, sort of random marks. So you can see there in the middle it's bleeding into the background. Make it a little bit darker now, I added a bit of neutral tint. Going a little bit thicker again, making the tone a little bit darker as we come around those car tops. So we have a nice bit of contrast. Doesn't matter if we leave little gaps as well. They can be made into something later on. Those little accidental areas of paper left. And I've got to work quite quickly here because it's starting to dry on the right hand side. It doesn't matter too much because those trees are closer to us. So it's still a little bit damp. There's a bit of movement still in the paint. Dilute it a little bit as I come down towards the bottom. Just lift a little bit off there to make it softer. And a bit of a darker mix here with the neutral tint added to it. Then around this right hand car, now over on the right hand side there's a sort of fence of corrugated iron. I'm not sure if I'm going to try and replicate that in the painting, but just add a bit of cerulean blue there just in case I want to do that. So let's just check that tree line. Nice bit of bleeding and blending going on there in the middle. Now for the cars, so car colours. So I'm going to obviously have to make them all a little bit different, but starting with this left-hand car, let's make it a sort of silvery, greyish type car. So a nice grey to mix up is a combination of cerulean blue there that I'm using and burnt sienna. It makes for a nice grey. So I've got a slightly smaller mop brush now, and let's get in the windscreen, leave out little bits of highlighted areas, and then the body of the car, same colour. Now car number 2, let's make it a slightly different colour and bleeding into the background a little bit, which is good, and slight connection there with the first car. Careful not to go over the headlights. And let's do car number 3 on the right hand side. So this one will be a reddish colour. This one being, so I'm imagining the light's coming from the right hand side. That's the other thing I need to think about when painting is where it's not obvious where is the light coming from. So let's imagine it's coming from the right hand side. So in this example, the light is catching all of the windscreen, so I'm not going to paint in the windscreen there, just paint in the body of the car. Now back with the big mop brush again, the one I started off first of all with. So we're now going to do the road surface, which when I looked at the photo, I thought of the sky as being mainly a sort of bluish tone, and then the road surface sort of a mauve, purple, burnt sienna type mix. So I'm going for a combination of ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson. We'll add in a bit of burnt sienna as well. So it's nice and light in the background, and I'll get a bit darker towards the bottom. So painting around the cars, they're still quite moist, so there's a bit of bleeding going on there, doesn't matter, and try and make this road surface now a little bit more intense. So I've added a bit more colour there, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, dragging out using the brush in the same direction as the road. Also, you can see that as I'm doing this wash, as I'm painting the road surface, I've got quite a lot of water in that well, so I'm not going to run out. I'm not going to suddenly halfway through doing the road think, oh, I need to add more water. There's plenty of water in there already, so I won't be left hanging around. Keep going on the left hand side, maybe leave out a few little marks there. The type of paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford, and it is the medium texture, not N-O-T. So it's got a few little bumps in it, which does help us introduce those little bits of sparkly light there as I just dragged the brush, a fairly dry brush, down over the pavement on the left hand side. Now let's mix in these dark reflections. So I've got to be fairly quick here while the road is still damp. I'm going to drop in this thicker mix, and quite dark, starting with that tree trunk, quite dark near there. Now this will dry lighter, so it might appear a bit too intense right now, but it will dry lighter. So you've got to think about that. You've got to kind of compensate for that when you're mixing this up. And then over to the road and starting underneath the car. So it's also going to bleed upwards into the car itself, and with a slight slope fall down the paper. Now for this demonstration, my paper is nearly flat, so I'm going to have to assist it by painting down as I'm doing now. Normally there would be with the paper on an angle, it would go down of its own accord, but I'm going to have to give it a bit of assistance here. Now over to the middle car, same mix, keep going. And leave a little bit of light there where the right hand, there's some light coming through underneath the chassis, between that and the road. Now over towards the right hand side we do have the reflection of the utility poles, those telegraph poles, and I'm connecting that with the reflections of that right hand car. We've got to think about these two figures as well, their reflections. So I'm actually here painting in some of the reflections before I actually paint the objects themselves, but I've got that pencil outline just to help me see where they're going to be. So this sort of paper, it does take a long time to dry and things are going on here. Sometimes to introduce some highlighted lines here, you can use a sharp object. I'm trying here with an old palette knife, but to be honest with you, I sometimes have a sort of mixed results with that. Sometimes they end up damaging the paper. So what I'm doing here now to introduce these highlighted lines across the road while the paper is still damp, I've got a small synthetic brush. It's damp, it's clean, and I'm just dragging it slowly, lifting off the colour. Keep going, a few more lines. And you can see as we go through those darker areas there, it does sort of give the effect of rain and wet. Let's drop in a bit of water here, do a bit of splattering as well. Another watercolor technique. Just dropping in there some clear water with that small synthetic brush. And then when you've done that splattering, just leave it. Don't go back into it. Just let watercolor do what it's going to do. Lovely cauliflower there, slap bang in the middle, which I think should look quite nice. We'll see how it develops. Now, yeah, so using this knife, this sharp object, I think I'm going to give up on that. I normally end up damaging the paper, so I'll revert to using my small brush, very carefully draw in the lines of the pavement slabs or that block paving, just a few lines to give an indication of that pavement and a bit of perspective as well, leading the eye into it. So a few verticals. Let's have a few horizontals as well. Not too many. Don't want to overdo it, but these are quite thick lines. Just test how dry that sky area is before I start with the main trees on the left hand side and that one on the right. I think while these dark reflections are still damp, I'll get in some tail light reflections of that left-hand car, which is going away from us. So drop those in. It's going to bleed a little bit. So I've used a bright red here, could be cadmium red. I think I've actually got now a Windsor red, as it's called, but it's just a bright red. Background, sorry, trees now. So I'm mixing Viridian Green and Burnt Umber. The combination of those two makes for a nice foliage type colour. And I've mixed in a little bit of neutral tint as well. So it's a sort of medium thickness here. I'm using that scruffy old brush again. And starting from the left-hand side in a random fashion, try not to make it too symmetrical. Let's give the appearance of this, not sure what sort of tree it is. It's obviously some sort of tropical evergreen tree. And there's a few little bits of light coming through it as well. Just make that outline first of all, coming down and into the center, having, as we come down, having less gaps through the foliage. Keep mixing, and it's a good bit drier now. And down to the bottom of the tree, where it's going to be its darkest, and then this trunk, which is going to connect to its reflection that I start off with. I'm going to have to think about merging those two together, the trunk with the reflection. I think it was some kind of a figure or something lurking just beyond the trees, so I've just indicated that there. And then with my finger, I'm just blending the tree trunk with the reflection, the wet surface. And I've just picked up some clear water and I'm dropping it into the tree, which will hopefully give a nicer effect of the tree and the appearance of a rainy day as well. So you can see it's just bleeding a little bit there, causing a few small little cauliflowers. Then left hand side, which I want to keep nice and simple. I think there were lots of other cars and things in the background, but we don't want to paint them in detail. But some of the shapes or objects on the left hand side, they were highlighted at the top, and there were some dark shadows below. Now the grass, this grass verge might be a little bit too dark. I'll lift out some of that in a minute, and a bit of shade darker area in the background there, connect with the canopy of the tree, allowing it to bleed into that grass verge. Not sure what's going on in the background there, but just making a few random marks with this brush. Yeah, so I think we need to add a bit more water to those trees. So I'm now just splattering in some water in a sort of downwards direction, and it's made a few interesting lines across that tree with a bit of tissue paper. I'm just lifting out some of the colour on that grass verge. It was a bit too intense. It needs to be blended a little bit with the pavement. So these two figures, so I've got a small synthetic brush, not too much detail, just dark shapes really, starting with the head and the body, and then just an indication of legs there, and then the second figure. Maybe this guy's got a hood on because it's raining. Try and make it a little bit different from the first figure. And then when I've still got this brush, we'll make a few horizontal lines on the right hand side. As I say, there was some kind of a corrugated iron fencing over there, so we'll just sort of indicate that with a few lines. Now I need to get this other tree in. Which is sort of similar in intensity to that left-hand tree, but it's a different, I think it's a different sort of tree, different sort of shape, like a round umbrella type shape. So starting with the top, few gaps at the top of the canopy. Just connect some of these different shapes there with their branches. and then down to the base of the tree and the top of that car. So there's another little area of some darkness up against the light. Use the finger again just to help things along. Helps with the blending. Now I'm going to paint in those strong vertical telegraph poles or telephone poles with the small synthetic brush, leaving a few gaps so it's not one continuous line, and in a rough fashion some of the vertical poles, and then we've got another one where we've got a few more in the middle. Again, not continuous lines. Let's have a few more over to the left. That gap needs to be filled in. So have a few more vertical lines over there. Just check how the paint is drying around the cars, so we can now get in a few more details on the cars. Some trim along the back of the car and radiators on the front of that car, just a few lines. Just helps it. It just helps it make it look a little bit more like a car. Now I'm using a sword brush here to paint in the lines, the telephone lines or electricity cables, whatever they are, and being actually holding quite a lot of water, got to get it quite right, otherwise you'll be dragging the brush across the paper and nothing happens, or if there's too much paint on the brush it all suddenly comes out in one big blob and you've got a nasty accident occurring. So you just got to judge it just right. And a few different lines here, some drooping cables and some lines coming out to the right which are going to help a little bit with the perspective. And over on the left hand side as well. And then while I've still got this brush, I can paint in just a few branches in that tree. It's still moist, as you can see, so I can still work at it. Now back to that, the back of that car is dry now, so I can paint in with that same bright red the tail lights, the rear lights of that car. And then with the same brush do a few more lines just to indicate the far right hand side there, the pavement, the base of the fence. Maybe this person's carrying something, add in a bag or something there. Add a bit more definition to the side of that pavement and the drains, and let's get a few more darker lines, not too many, don't want to overdo it, on the pavement here. And then with almost a dry brush stroke here, add in a few more lines across the surface, just here and there. Now there's that rickshaw in the background. That's going to, it was parked on the left hand side and it was beyond this car on the left, so it's going to help with that contrast, being quite a dark shape against the lightness of the roof. So let's get that in with this small synthetic brush, and then the driver in the middle. And in a way, it's sort of, that rickshaw is connected to the tree, and the rickshaw's connected to the car. So it just helps bring all these different objects together. Don't want to overdo these windscreens. Just an indication of that front wheel on that car. Put in a few more lines on that pole, and it sort of then disappears into the foliage, and then a few reflections of that pole. I'll just touch up this figure a bit more, try and make it a bit more convincing. So just spotting a few marks there on top of those poles. Just a few little dabs. Now that tree, the left-hand tree and the right-hand tree, is still pretty moist, so they need to be softened a little bit. So going in with a paper towel here or a tissue and just lift out some of that colour. And a bit more splattering. With clear water and some vertical lines, top to bottom, bottom to top. So we're near the end now. I'm just sort of looking for different things to do. We need to get the car headlight reflections in. Maybe this windscreen just needs a bit more detail to it. Although it's quite nice just being totally left unpainted there. Nice bright reflection and a good bit of contrast to the foliage in the back. As I say, I've got to think about the car headlights. There's a final stage. So I'm using some white gouache paint here, straight out of the tube, and just dragging down a few lines there. So a bit more intense at the top and then getting a bit weaker as we come down. And while I've got this, let's have some horizontal lines as well against that dark background. Might just add something to the composition very carefully there. Drag a line. There's some supporting lines on the right hand side there. Maybe just a touch of highlights on these figures, not too much because it's a rainy day. And make a few more lines. Don't want to overdo it because it looks quite fresh on that left hand side. Just a few minor white lines here, just helps give the effect of a wet surface. So I think we're just about done. Do a bit of final lifting out. That tree is still damp. Looks a bit better. And the main tree as well. Then try and make the base of those reflections less intense, just sort of smudge them in there. The white gouache, it does tend to be less bright as it dries. So you've got to sort of compensate for that when you use that. So that's it. What I'll show you now is the finished painting. So here is the finished painting, and I haven't actually cropped it at all. The size is 15 inches across by 11 inches down. So I've allowed it to dry, and I've also rubbed out, there were some pencil lines on the cars on the rooftops, so I've rubbed those out as well, which I sometimes do. Sometimes leave in the pencil marks, so other times I might rub them out just to intensify that area of bright light or paper showing through. So yes, a rainy day. Thanks very much, Pyara, for sending me through that photo. So as I said at the start, if any of you out there would like to send me a photo for future consideration as a YouTube demo subject, I'd love to hear from you. But there are a few requirements I need around that, please. First of all, I do need to make sure that the photo is yours. You took the photograph and you own it. You haven't sold it to anyone else. I don't want to get into trouble with anyone, you see, so I just have to make sure I do everything right. So you own the photo, and you haven't sold it to anyone else. I would also like to know the photo location, please. That would be very useful. And you must be a subscriber to my YouTube channel. Now, I am swamped every day by loads of emails, so I can't individually answer everyone, so apologies in advance on that. So I may not be able to answer you, but please, if you've got any interesting ideas or some challenges, maybe a scene that you're having some difficulty with, and you think that might be useful to the watercolor community out there, then please email me an image, JPEG or similar image to my email address, timothywilmot@gmail.com. Please also go to my website, timwilmot.com, timwilmot.com, and you'll see a gallery up there and my regular postings of recent pictures and information also on workshops and the online, also do online tuition as well. So wherever you are in the world, if you've got some time to spare, we can hook up on a one-to-one session online via the web. Very, very simple. I provide all the technology for that. But please contact me for details on that. So, rainy day subject. Thanks for watching. Hopefully catch up with you soon. Thank you.